Hey everyone, this is David Brown, and yesterday, August 18th, 2023, I made a trip to Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Pennsylvania for a day of early season hawkwatching. I arrived at the North Lookout right around 6:20 a.m., which was sunrise, and had the place to myself for about an hour and a half, so just a beautiful place to spend a peaceful morning. I loved seeing all the fog down in the valley, and actually on the drive down there was quite a bit of rain, kind of the lingering rain from a cold front to pass through overnight, but just a beautiful morning. A little bit chilly. I debated whether or not to take up my sweatshirt, and there were moments that I wish I had it, but just really fresh air with a cool west-northwest breeze picking up throughout the day. And finally, the sun popped up above the clouds, giving a spectacular sunrise. I like to get to Hawkwatches early because I like to feel like I was there for the whole day and didn't miss anything, and also because there's more songbird activity in the morning, so I was hoping for some warblers and other migrants. Here we have a rose-breasted grosbeak. I had a couple warblers, not a lot, and with it being fairly dark out and early in the fall migration, I'm not really tuned into their identification, and many of them have cryptic plumages this time of year. I put this photo up and some people suggested Cape May warbler. I also had this early morning great blue heron fly high overhead heading south. This juvenile sharp-shinned hawk landed in a tree nearby, and there had been some blue jays around, and this bird was about the same size as them, so when it first plopped in, I thought it might just be a blue jay until I put my camera up and started photographing it. Here's the same sharp-shinned hawk in flight, so it's an accipiter, so it has a somewhat long tail and somewhat squared off tip to the tail, although it's very ragged and tough to tell from this angle. And we see that the head looks fairly small. And here's another photo that I intentionally left dark to show the kind of the play between where the sun was hitting and where it was in shadow, but we can still see that small head and also the long tail with squared off tip. Here's a photo from the front of the lookout looking back towards the counters pit. So in here is where the official counters are. The seat that I usually take is this nice soft rock over here, but you can just see pretty much come up and pick a rock and hang out there. And here's one more rain shower that passed through, thankfully missing me. We did have a few periods of sprinkles throughout the day, but overall no heavy rain. And here's a selfie of yours truly. Here's a chimney swift, which they say looks like a flying cigar. There were a couple of Baltimore orioles around and making chattering noises. Here we have a female. Here's a great crested flycatcher that was perched up at the top of a tree, and you can see that yellow belly that they have. I usually go to Hawk Mountain in the colder months in November and December for red-tailed hawks and golden eagles, so I don't notice the trees as much then, but this time I took notice of this tree, which I believe is an American chestnut, and it has quite a few chestnuts on it. Here we have a turkey vulture soaring, and the one thing I like about a place like Hawk Mountain is that you get to look down on a lot of the birds. So instead of having a sky background, you get the nice color of the mountains in the background. Most of my hawk watching is done from low elevation sites. Braddock Bay and Ashland, we're usually down below the birds. We don't have many chances to photograph the top side of birds. And here's a red-tailed hawk that's just hanging in place. We would call this kiting, when they just face into the wind and can just stay stationary looking down below them for prey. But I think it's pretty spectacular. You know, he's pretty much at eye level for us up on top of the mountain, so you can imagine he's probably looking like 1,000 feet or more down below him. Here we have two cedar waxwings, and you can see that they have slightly different plumages. You have the younger one here on the left, a little bit stripy looking. This common raven gave us a nice top side view. And ravens are really common up at Hawk Mountain. We saw a lot more ravens yesterday than we did crows. Ravens just look a little bit more stretched out than crows. They got kind of longer wings that look a little bit pointed, kind of a big head and big bill. The tail looks a little bit more stretched out. And we had a good variety of swallows throughout the day. I was happy to see this purple martin in the morning. And here's a headless hawk. No, actually it's just a turkey vulture looking down so that you can't see the head. Here's a juvenile broad-winged hawk that was diving down, but it lets us take a look at the underside plumage. They have some vertical streaking on the breast. It's not that defined belly band like red-tailed hawks have, but it is vertical streaking. And we see that they do not have dark patagial bars in this area. And it's a buteo, so it's the same shape as like a red-tailed hawk. You know, it's kind of a medium-length tail, and just overall just a well-proportioned hawk. And here's another look at that juvenile broad-winged hawk. And we're about a month out from the peak of the broadwings. They really peak in mid-September, anywhere between the 15th and the 25th. That's prime time. So only really a month away from that when you can get hundreds or even thousands of broad-winged hawks on a good day if you're lucky. Here we have a vulture, and you might look at that head and say, okay, the head is not red, it's black, so it must be a black vulture. But actually, this is a juvenile turkey vulture. So the juvenile turkey vultures have a dark head. You see it still has a lot of fuzz on it, which is one sign of it being a juvenile. And just the overall shape of the bird, it has that long turkey vulture tail, and it's got the two-toned pattern to the wings where you have a lot of silver. The whole trailing edge is silver compared to a black vulture where it's just these outer primaries are the silver ones. And black vultures have a much different shape with kind of a really short tail. This adult red-tailed hawk perched in the tree in front of the lookout, posing nicely for us. Here it is in flight. You can see that dark brown eye. Here's the belly band coming across, and you can see the red tail. Here's an underside view of the same bird as it banked. Again, you're seeing that belly band come across here. It does have some streaking dribbling down from the throat. Sometimes that's a sign that we say of the northern red-tailed hawks, but this time of year, we would just be expecting the normal eastern red-tailed hawks or borealis. So there's a lot of variation in how heavy the markings are of red tails of every subspecies. So it's not a sign that this one's a northern, just on the more heavily marked end of the spectrum. And again, we can see that red tail. And remember, the adult red tails have a dark trailing edge to the wing, which we see here as well. Here's the same red tail trying to perch on a tree off to our left side, and it had some trouble with the landings. It was pretty funny when it would try to come in and land multiple times. We thought he was going to lose his balance and fall off the mountain. Here's another angle of the same bird. And if we take a look at the tail, you can actually see some tail feathers that are growing in right now. So the bird's molting. You can see that these black lines should line up with the black line on the other tail feathers, but you have a feather growing in here as well as one over here. And here he is giving us a butt shot with the tail pointing up. And you might think he would want to keep an eye on people, see what we're up to, but actually most birds, when they're perched or when they're standing and they want to be able to take off quickly, they always face into the wind. So this bird was actually facing into the wind in case he had to take off. Same principle with airplanes. They always take off into the wind as well, just to get more wind over the wings and feathers. Here's another look at an adult red-tailed hawk in flight. Again, notice those dark patagial bars in the shoulder area, as well as the red tail and the dark trailing edge to the wing. Here we have a bald eagle that's not quite a full adult yet. You can see it's still got a lot of splotchy white underneath. Here we have an adult broad-winged hawk. So again, kind of similar shape to the red tail, but the wings look a little pointier because the wingtips are only made up of 4 feathers. So especially when they go into a glide posture like this, they really tuck those wingtips back. Usually have a really straight trailing edge to the wing in a glide as well. And the tail we can see looks dark with one white band, although from a distance and depending on lighting, sometimes that's hard to see. But if they fan the tail out, that's usually a lot more obvious, or if you see the top side of it. It's an adult, so it has a dark trailing edge to the wing, and we also see a horizontal brown barring. And again, when I say horizontal, that's as if the bird was sitting up perched. It's a horizontal barring compared with the vertical streaking of the juveniles. Here's another look at an adult red-tailed hawk, and this one's got kind of a funny pale head to it. Not sure the reason for that, maybe just plumage variation, but looks a little bit unusual in the head area. You can see that belly band coming across here, and we can also see the red tail. Here's another adult broad-winged hawk. This one's tucked into even more of a glide with those wingtips pointed back. But again, we see that horizontal brown barring and the dark trailing edge to the wing. And the tail looks dark with a white band, although the white band isn't as obvious here. It's more of like a mixture of darks and lights, just because you have the undertail coverts, and then you have some black from the tail, white from the tail, then black from the tail, and then a white tip. Here we have a barn swallow, and they have a really distinctive shape in that they have a really long forked tail, although the tail here is really pretty much completely closed, but you can still see that forked tip to it. Here's an osprey, which are pretty easy to identify just because they're lanky and a very bold black and white plumage. Don't really look like anything else. Here we have the top side of an adult bald eagle. You can see the white head and white tail. We don't really see any signs of it still being immature. And here we have the adult bald eagle getting dove on by a red-tailed hawk. This one looks to be a juvenile with that more brownish tail. Here's some more cedar waxwings passing by. We had many small flocks throughout the day. Here's a hawk that looks a bit like a flying cross, has a long tail. It's got a pretty big head. It's pushing its wrists forward, so the head's not sticking out as much as it might otherwise be. But if we look at the tail tip, it's a very rounded tail tip. We can see the outer tail feathers end about here, and then the central ones are much longer. So rounded tail, we see large head and teardrop streaking that is heaviest on the upper breast, but also extends down onto the belly a bit. So all of those features together make this a juvenile Cooper's hawk. And at the same time as that Cooper's hawk, we had two of these. So looking at this bird, it was very small, and we can see it has pointed wings. So this is a small falcon. It is an American kestrel. And here we have the American kestrel on the right, chasing the Cooper's hawk on the left. And you can get a sense of the difference in the shapes and the size as well. So the kestrel is smaller and has very pointed wingtips. Cooper's hawk is bigger, and the wingtips would look more rounded. Usually it's kind of holding its wing in a funny position right now because he's being chased and trying to look back over his shoulder. And here's a look at the other American kestrel that was with them. And again, notice those very pointed wingtips. It kind of sweeps its wings back and comes to a point. Here's a mourning dove that landed in that same tree that the red tail struggled so much with. Here we have a juvenile bald eagle, and we can see really dark head and dark underside to the body, but a lot of white in the wing pit area. Here we have two black vultures. So you can see those gray heads, but overall, other than that, they're pretty much dark except for some silver here at the wingtips. Very stocky, compact shape to black vultures and short tails. The toes almost really extend out past the tail. Here's another common raven that gave us a nice look. And again, notice the size of that bill. And if we take a look at the tail, we notice that the outer tail feathers are quite a bit shorter than the central ones, giving the tail kind of a diamond shape if we traced it out like this. Here's a look at another female American kestrel, so a small falcon. We can see those pointed wingtips, and the females have this vertical streaking on the breast. Here's the top side of the same bird, and we can see that the female American kestrels are just pretty much completely brown and black on top. They don't have any blue or orange like we see on the males. Here's a somewhat distant look at a soaring adult broad-winged hawk. So we can see those pointed wingtips, kind of a compact buteo. And with the tail, we see it looks like a dark tail with one wide white band on it. And here's a closer look at another adult broad-winged hawk. So again, we see that dark trailing edge to the wings, and we can see that white band on the tail. Here's a male American kestrel, so we can see that they have an orange back and they have a lot of blue in the wings. And on the top side of the tail, we see that it has an orange tail with a black tip, and you can see that some of the central tail feathers are growing in. So again, this black right here is going to grow and come out and match up with the other black as the tail feather grows out. And here's the underside view of the same bird, and you can see that on the females, they had streaking underneath. The males have these little black dots. Here's another adult bald eagle migrating by. Here's some more cedar waxwings that perched in the tree briefly, and you can see the juvenile one down here. Here we have a swallow, and I believe this is just a tree swallow. I was seeing quite a few of these that are not that classic blue that you think of with tree swallows, but more kind of brownish on top with a little bit of a band across the upper breast right here. So you might be tempted to call it a bank swallow. But bank swallows would be smaller with a more defined band. So I think this is probably just a female or a young tree swallow. Here's the black vulture that passed overhead, and a couple things to note on this. Again, they look dark overall except for the silver here at the wingtips, and the tails are relatively short. Now we see this one is growing in some new tail feathers. That's why they kind of have these shorter feathers. Normally they wouldn't be that short. They would kind of meet the other ones out here. The other thing you might notice is that this bird has a wing tag, a patagial tag we might call it. And that's just something that Hawk Mountain puts on birds like vultures to research them. So it's something that's field readable. So people like me can observe the bird and then report that so they can track its movement. And it's something that's a lot cheaper than, say, putting GPS transmitters on a large number of birds. The bird made a couple passes. Here we see a topside view, and you can see the tag normally would be readable on the top side as well. It looks like it's broken off in this case. And here's a look at the underside of the bird, and you can see that it looks like the tag reads 213. Now the 3 is covered by feathers a little bit, so a little hard to read, but pretty sure this is 213. So I'll report it and get information about when it was banded, how old it was when it was banded, if it's known, right? If they caught it in a nest, for example, then they would know how old it is exactly. If they caught it as an adult, they might only know that it was already an adult when they caught it. And for comparison, here we have a turkey vulture. Notice the red head. Notice that the entire trailing edge to the wings is silvery. And also notice that it's holding its wings up into a V shape, which we call a dihedral. It's very classic for turkey vultures to hold their wings up in a V and be very unsteady and wobble when they fly. Here's a swallow with a light forehead and a lot of red on the face. So this is actually a cliff swallow, which was a lot of fun to see. We had a handful of these. It's one of the less common species of swallow. A lot of times you'll see them actually nesting. They build these like mud nests under bridges. Here we have another juvenile bald eagle, so one that would have been born this spring or summer. You can see just that really dark plumage, dark head, dark underside of the body, but a lot of white in the wing pit area. If you look at the head, we can see how big it is with a really large bill. Later on, as you get into October, November, December, Hawk Mountain will get a lot of golden eagles migrating as well. But this time of year, we're only expecting to see bald eagles. Here's another adult broad-winged hawk, and this is a good shape to know because when the birds are following the ridge and gliding by, this is the kind of angle that you'll often get of them. They can look somewhat similar to the accipiters like sharp-shinned hawks and Cooper's hawks, but notice that it doesn't have a really long tail. It's more of a short to medium tail. Here's a red-tailed hawk gliding overhead. Again, notice those dark patagial bars as well as the belly band. Here's a side view of an osprey, and a lot of times when osprey are coming at you, they have kind of a droop to the wings. That's something that's distinctive, especially a place like Hawk Mountain where you can look up ridge and the birds are following the ridge and coming straight at you at eye level. You'll notice that on ospreys. They have kind of a McDonald's M droop to the wings. Here's a look at another osprey, and I had spotted this one way out. I was just scanning with the scope way off in the distance because there wasn't much else going on at this point in the day. I picked up the osprey and I decided, okay, I'll watch it in the scope until it goes by. And I was watching it, and it was gliding in, and then eventually it started to circle. And it really didn't circle for that long. I feel like it was less than a minute, but it gained so much altitude, and then it started to glide. And by the time it glided overhead, I mean, you could barely see this thing with the naked eye. It was way, way, way up there. So you can tell from the quality of the photo how high it was. But this is just a classic osprey posture. You don't really see any of our other hawks go into this angular of a look. And here's another look at the same osprey as it finally passed over. And again, just notice how far it's pushing those wrists forward, giving it a really angular look to the wings. And that combined with the black and white plumage and the size, that's enough to help you identify it as an osprey. And here's a look at another osprey that came by closer. And it's actually common late in the day to get a push of ospreys. And basically, if you think of what's happening with the migration, a place like Hawk Mountain has such good hawk migration because when you have a northwest wind, that wind is hitting the ridge perpendicular and getting deflected upwards. So you can have raptors just gliding along the ridge with that air pushing them up from underneath. And what happens a lot of days that are sunny especially is there's also a lot of thermals in the mid part of the day. So maybe the hawks aren't as reliant on the ridge. But as you get into the afternoon and late afternoon and the thermals start to die down, a lot of raptors start to pick up the ridge again. So a lot of times it pays to stay until the end of the day and you'll get a nice push of things like eagles and ospreys that are following the ridge and give you fairly good looks. And here's one more look at a red-tailed hawk that migrated by towards the end of the day. Again, you can see those patagial bars just barely on this bird. And it has somewhat of a belly band as well. Kind of a funny looking bird, but just from the overall coloration and everything, we know it's a red tail. We can see that dark trailing edge to the wings, so we know it's an adult as well. And with the sun angle at the end of the day, just the vista out in front of you is so beautiful. And here's another angle looking from the north lookout at the end of the day. Taking a look at the eBird checklist, I had about 40 species for the day. And if we look at the hawk count report, the official counter for the day was JF Therian. And the birds that were counted as migrants were 3 osprey, 8 bald eagles, 2 Cooper's hawks, 9 broad-winged hawks, 6 red-tailed hawks, and 7 American kestrels for a total of 35 migrants. And that was my day of hawk watching at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Pennsylvania. And we're right at the beginning of the migration. They just started the count on August 15th, and they go until December 15th. So things are just getting started. Again, as we get into mid-September, that's the peak of the broad-winged hawk migration. And then as you get into October, you just have a really good variety of birds with a lot of falcons and accipiters, so your Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks. And then as you get later in the season, into the end of October through November into December, that's when you really have a big push of red-tailed hawks. And that's when you see the golden eagles and northern, oh wait, I almost said it wrong, American goshawks. Remember, they changed the name this year. So that's something we'll have to get used to, is no more northern goshawks. No-go is no-mo. Now it's the American goshawk. But anyway, Hawk Mountain is a beautiful place. I hope you can get there and visit if you've never been there. And if you've been there before, you know how special it is, and I hope you can get out to do some hawk watching there again. From Lyco Birds, this is David Brown. Thanks for watching.